Well, I've brought you to the fantastic Partridge fishery today, where we are on Holbar, a brilliant lake with loads of different fish. So we thought it'd be really nice today to talk through a little bit of soft pellet fishing. For me, on commercials, it's almost like the standard, like soft pellet fishing on a pole. That is as basic as stick float fishing on a river. That is the basics of a commercial these days. And if you can understand it and get the best from it, one, you can catch everything. You can have some great days fishing all year round. So I felt this was the perfect place to show you what to do. Now, before we get started, we've got to look at some bait preparation. So we'll go and do that first, and then we'll head over to the peg. Job number one is to prepare the pellets. It doesn't really matter what sort of soft pellet fishing I'm doing. I always prepare my pellets in the same way, because often you might actually want to combine, say, a soft pellet day with, say, method feeder or something like that. So I always do them the same, so then I know I've got like consistency. Dead easy to do. So I'm going to just use Thin Perfect Feed pellets. For me, these are a lovely pellet for whenever I'm fishing soft pellets, because they hold their shape. Just got to be careful, because sometimes pellets can sort of over explode and just go to mush, and that's not what I want. I need the pellet to almost like hold its form, so it's like an individual bait. That's really important, whether you're method feeder fishing or soft pellet fishing on a pole, whatever sort of pellet fishing you're doing. So that's why I like to go for a reliable pellet. I'm going to go for a whole bag today, because I'm going to have loads of fish in and hopefully bag up. So in they go into the bucket. Now, this is the most important thing. It's the amount of water that you put onto the pellet. So what I like to do is, the best way to describe it is, put the water in and then pat all the pellets down so they're level. And when you're patting the pellets down, almost like your hand should be like patting the top of the water as well. You don't want any excess water. You don't want the water over the top of the pellets, all right? So you need to make sure all the pellets have like touching the water. That's the best description when you like flatten them down. So I also like to change my pellets up a little bit. I like a slightly yellow sweetened pellet, so I always add the Bait Booster Power Scopex. For me, that's a really important part of what I'm adding into my mix. You can't really overdo it. Don't know if you've ever seen like a cooking show and you watch them just flamboyantly put olive oil onto their food. That's pretty much what I'm doing here. I don't need to measure it in. I'm just like a gut feel of how much I want onto my pellets. You don't, like I say, it's not a exact science. I just want them to be nice and strong and flavoured. They're going in a big lake anyway. So the beauty of this is it's a nice thick liquid. It dissolves with the water. It gets in all the pellets, and it also helps the pellets hold their shape. So that's going in first, like a big glug of that. In it goes. And then I'm just going to pour the water into the middle of the pellets, and then give that a good stir around. So basically it dissolves all that Power Scopex to cover them all. And then when I literally go around patting the pellets into the bucket, and it ends up, so all the pellets, you can basically see the water and the pellets together on the top. And then leave it for at least an hour. I try to leave it for longer. I often do this at home before I set off in the morning. So then when I get onto the bank, sort of a couple of hours later, by the time I've had a coffee and that, it's absolutely perfect. And for me, having the pellets right is the most important part of the bait preparation. So while those micros are getting ready, I'll just talk about the hook bait, because what I want to get across to you guys today is it's such an easy way of fishing. You don't need loads of bait. If you've got those softened micros, then you just need some hook bait. Of course, you can use this as part of like a complete set of fishing. You might want to be feeding some maggots down the side or anything else, but this is about getting this fundamentally right and how easy this can be, because on a lot of occasions this is like your bread and butter style fishing, just to put something in the net of all sizes. So first of all, I always think I want a choice of hook baits. I like 4mm and 6mm expanders. Sometimes there might be some like lots of little roach in the venue where you're fishing, and a 6mm expander is just a little bit bigger, gives you something a bit more stand out. But if there isn't, I'm always going for a 4mm. That's always the one I want to start with. It's what I want to try and catch on, because it's just a slightly smaller bait. I think when the fish hook sucks it in, you've obviously got a better chance of a good hook hold with a smaller pellet. I just think it works a lot nicer, but you need the choices there, because it's not always that straightforward. So there's two ways to do your pellets. First of all, I'm a big fan of the Pro expanders. The idea behind these are they don't need pumping, they just sink. Once they've softened up, they sink, and that's what makes them so good in my opinion. I just use the 4 and 6 mil. We actually do a sweet F1 version now, which is fantastic because I do like my bait to taste right. I know that sounds a bit weird. I don't want the fish almost like sucking it in and not being happy with it. So not that they should, but if there's a bit of extra smell on there, why not? So I've been using the sweet F1 version since they've come out. It's straightforward. I tend to just get a clip lock tub. In that clip lock tub, I will put a mixture of 4 and 6s. So that amount of pellets roughly, and then I will literally cover them with water, at least double the amount of water that there is pellets. You don't need to be stingy. You can mix in some bait booster if you want to, because you know what, why not? I do. You can see it's just turned those pellets very slightly yellow. So I always mix a bit of that in because I just like the slight yellow colour. I believe it stands out a little bit better on the bottom. And for me, again, that bait booster is a thicker liquid, so it just keeps the density of the pellet just dead right. So you can put that in there if you want to. I actually did these this morning before I left because the Pro Expanders do take a good 2 hours to soften up. You know, you can't do them on the bank. That is one thing I would say. You need to be well prepared. Ideally, do them the night before, put them in a little clip lock tub, leave them on the garage floor or keep them in a fridge if you've got a fridge to the hand. And then that's it. And you can see there's a tiny bit of water still left in the bottom, which is great. It means you can just almost like turn your finger around in them every now and again, keep them all nice and moist. I literally keep them in that tub. This is the way I did pellets for 15 years, and it's still a great way to do them. Effectively, I put a sample of hook bait into a bag and then literally just enough water to cover the pellets, and then turn the bag right down and put a knot in them. The beauty of this is the pellet can't overexpand. The pellet can only expand to the point where the bag stops it, which means it doesn't sort of explode or go too far. To be fair, the Pro Expanders are so good, you can just do them in a tub like this, but this is still a great way of doing pellets. Don't think that it's not. If this is how you do your pellets, keep at it because it's a great way of doing them. So there's 2 different options there with your hook bait, but like I said, a nice mix of 4 and 6s is important. Let's have a little look at these micros, see how they've come out. Right, so here are the pellets, nice hard solid block in the bottom. Just get your hand underneath it all, turn them all over now, and I've got lovely soft expanders here that haven't overly blown. So these are soft all the way through, but they've all kept their shape, which is really important. And you can see a nice little yellow tinge on there, which is the bait booster. So I've got a nice little standout feed pellet, nice and sweet, absolutely perfect and ready to go. Like I say, you want to give these at least an hour. You know, you really want to make sure that the pellet is soft all the way through. They work better for feeding, in the tub, everything. So get those prepared in advance. I'm literally just going to take a great big handful and pop them in my bait tub to kick us off. I'm going to leave the rest in the bucket covered over, just so they don't dry out or anything like that. And they're going to be ready to go. So that's it. My bait's dead simple. I've got my feed pellets and my hook pellets. I think we should have a little look at the rig and see about where we're going to fish. So we've got a very typical commercial peg here. A few reeds growing out from the side and then some nice open water in front of us. Don't really know what we're going to catch today, and you can do this at any distance. I don't tend to like to go too far, if I'm being perfectly honest. My general rule is the warmer it is, the closer to me I will fish. In the winter when it's colder, I'll push out into as long as I can get away with. But you can see it's quite windy today, which is good. It's nice and mild. I shouldn't have to go far. Got a few cameramen on the bank, so I've pushed out a little bit further than I might do usually. But I would look to say fishing sort of 6, 7, 8 meters. Today I'm at 10 meters, so like a little bit further. And I think that's really important because you are fishing for a bit of everything. You can do this approach in the margins. You can fish in the edge like on a top kit. Everything that I'm going to show you today, you can fish wherever you want, but this is sort of just generally getting the best from an open water swim. Generally speaking, on most commercials where you'll be fishing will probably be quite silty and soft. So, you know, everything that I'm going to talk to you about reflects that and how I'm going to manage the bait to get the best out of it. The rig is the first thing that we need to talk about. It's very, very straightforward, and I think that pellet rigs need to be kept nice and simple. For me, there's nothing fancy about them. They're really straightforward. Let's start at the top. I've got Literally 11 Dura slip in today, just something nice and soft and forgiving. I'm hoping to catch like a few big bream, maybe an F1 or two, chance for a roe carp. So I've got something that's going to be forgiving for all the species. Once we're into winter, I'll be using 7 and 9s, dead light, lots of elastic everywhere, super easy. The main line, because we are fishing, again, it is like sort of summer, autumn time, 018 main line, nice and robust, dead straightforward. I'm going to talk about these back shot in a minute. I just want to concentrate on the float to start with. F1 pellet, wouldn't use anything else. You've got a nickel titanium base. Whenever you're pellet fishing, you definitely need a heavier stem. You don't want a carbon stem, in my opinion. You either want wire or, better still, nickel titanium, which gives you a bit of weight in the stem, but obviously isn't going to bend out of shape. I've gone 414s because, as you can see from the marks on my top kit, we're 4 foot deep today. 4 foot, 414s, probably about right, especially with it being quite windy. I also think it's important to have this nice hollow bristle, very visible, but also means I can shot it down nicely and still see it. This is 1.5 mil on these floats, so that's a nice setup. Going down the rig, for me it's dead straightforward. All I've got here is basically some shot spaced at 1 inch intervals. That creates like a bulk at the bottom end of the rig, but more importantly, it just keeps all this end of the rig nice and stable. You could bulk them all on top of the hook length, but personally I've found it's better for hitting bites and everything a little bit more stable at this bottom end, just to spread them out. You can imagine that sort of sits like this, one on top of the other, and keeps all the rig nice and tight and straight down at the bottom. When you pellet fish, you're not trying to fish through the water in effect, you're trying to get your bait down to the bottom nice and quickly. Don't get me wrong, fish will still see it in that last bit, but they don't need it falling dead slow. You can almost like whiz it past them to catch their attention, and then they'll go and eat your bait. So you don't need a really strung out shotting pattern. Just note I've put like a couple of little stots at the top of that. These are what I call my trimming shot. So if the float takes on a little bit of water, or for example, I'm not very happy with how it's sitting, I can either take one off or add one on there to keep it dead easy. And then your hook length, this time of year I've gone for 014 AccuPower, and I've got a 14 SFL on here, mainly because I don't want a dead tiny hook. I always think with an expander you can get away with a bigger hook. You don't need a really tiny little hook because most of it's in the bait anyway. The fish picks it up, the bait's light anyway, so you don't need a dead light hook with it. They suck it in, and you want plenty of hook, obviously, to set the hook. So I tend to go for a 14 in the summer and in the autumn, 16 in winter time, probably when I'm fishing more 4mm baits. So that allows me to put 4 and 6 mils on. I'll never put a 6mm on with anything but a 14, even in the winter. So just make sure your hook is balanced to the size of pellet that you're fishing. I've gone 014 because I feel that gives me a great chance of getting a carp out, but at the same time I don't want to miss out on all these nice big skimmers that are in this lake, so I can catch those as well. Just moving back up to the top, it's really windy today. It's gusty, it's not very nice. Now when I'm pellet fishing, I like to fish as short a line as I possibly can get away with between float and pole tip. Often I'll fish like 3 or 4 inches. So I really recommend, if there's no wind, nice calm day, wind's off your back, try and fish with that nice short length of line. I can't do that today, so what I've got is about 18 inches of line, but I've actually put 2 number 8s at 3rd intervals. Now what that does is it effectively gives me a short line that I'm in control of. So these 2 weights will sort of like balance above the float, and I can't afford to let this shot drop down too low because it'll drag the float under. So what it actually does, it gives me like the same sort of effect as having a short length of line between the pole tip and float. So it means I'm always in touch with the float. And when you're pellet fishing, that's really important. Don't put a great big long lash on and just leave it hanging. You'll just miss bite after bite. When you're fishing with pellets, you must be what I call in touch with the float. The perfect way would be to have almost 1 inch or 2 of line just underneath the surface, so the float's nice and relaxed, but when it goes under, you're literally picking up straight into it. You don't want to be super tight to the float because otherwise you'll stop it pulling under. So that's a really important part of pellet fishing for me, having control of the float at all times. Now, in this typical open water swim, what I don't want to be doing is kicking it off with a load of bait. So I would, generally speaking, kick the peg off quite straightforward by, effectively, I've got the lid off my cad pot here. I would fill the pot up because, you know, this is a busy time of year. There's a lot of fish. Don't be shy with the bait and just literally tap in a few pellets there and tap them in. That's how I would kick the session off. And then I would probably move to like half filling the pot with pellets and tap those in every single time I ship out. But we'll talk a little bit about the feeding as we go, because I might end up putting a bigger pot on, or I might end up just putting like 10 or so micros in every time. We'll have to change that depending on how the peg is reacting. But before we do any of that, I just want to show you how to plumb up, because when you're pellet fishing, how much line you have on the bottom is very important. You don't want to have loads of line on the bottom. So I get a nice big heavy plummet, my 30-gram plummet, and I'm just going to ship out here and try and show you exactly how I plumb up. I like to try and keep like the body of the float showing. So I've already shipped it out because I didn't want to be wasting lots of time showing you guys finding the depth. I'm sure you know how to do that. But where I'm going to fish today, effectively, when I drop the plummet in, I'm looking to have the body of the float and the bristle showing. So if you see me drop that in, look, lower that in, donk. I've got the body of the float and the bristle showing, which in my head, once the float is relaxed, obviously the plummet's on there, you can see I'm probably going to have, like, say, an inch or two of relaxed line on the bottom. And what that means is that when the fish suck in the bait, they can suck in the bait without feeling the float, but obviously they've only got this much line before it registers on the float. When you have it so just the bristles showing, or dead depth, that's too critical. It's almost like the pellet will bounce up and down in the waves. The line is directly above the pellet, so when the fish sucks the bait in, often like they almost like spit it out straight away. I think it's really important to give the fish a chance to take the bait in, but not too much slack line that I'm not going to see the bite. What I don't want to have is, say, like 6 inches of line on the bottom. So just having a little bit of line on the bottom like that seems to be absolutely perfect. So what we're going to do is I'll show you how to hook the pellet in that. But before we do that, just to make sure we get off to a good start, let's put a little bit of bait in the peg. So I'm going to kick it off with like a cad pot full of these softened micros. All right. And when I ship this out, you'll actually notice that where I'm going to fish today is just on the joint of a pole section. So it's really important to line up with a far bank marker. So I've got myself a nice far bank marker that I can see, and I know I can fish there every single time. And I've got the joint here in my hand. So effectively every single time I feed and I sit with the elbow behind me, the joint of the pole is on my hand. It doesn't get any more accurate than that. And because the wind is a little bit stiff today, I'm just going to turn this over, touch it on the water. The water will free the pellets and out they come. And you'll see I've got the pole section behind me. There's lots of space behind me today, so I don't have to worry about banging the pole section, but it balances my pole fantastically well. It means if I want to go past the bait, I can just push the pole out and I can see how far I am past the bait. Or if I want to come back onto the bait, I can hold the pole, and almost as the wind's trying to blow my pole this way, it's trying to blow the back bit the other way, which means it helps keep everything nice and balanced. So on a windy day, I nearly always fish with a little bit of pole behind me. I think it's really good practice when you're pole fishing because it helps you balance everything out and it helps you be nice and accurate, which is super important. So let's talk a little bit about hooking the pellet, and we'll go out there and see if there's any fish. For me, hooking the expander is one of the most important things. Every expander, if I get a big one, it'll be easier to show you. So every expander they're almost like cut. I can imagine they're like rolled into a tube and then cut. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to go through the flat end, because the grain of the pellet is the same line as the flat end. So if I went in through the flat end and then pulled through the pellet, there isn't any resistance there. There isn't any sort of grain to grab hold of the pellet. So what I like to do is actually go in through the side of the pellet and then just roll the pellet on like that. So I've got the hook exposed out the side of the pellet, and the pellet's nice and tough, holding on there, and it's not going to come off too easily, because one of the biggest problems when I'm pellet fishing is my pellet coming off, and I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. That's why I've got the Pro expanders in the first place, which are definitely that little bit tougher, but hooking it the right way is very important. You must have the hook point showing. Don't bury the hook point into the pellet, because you're just not going to hit as many bites. So I'm just going to roll this first 4mm on. Let's put that in my hand so you can see it there. There we go, look. So you can see plenty of hook point exposed. The pellet's sitting lovely on the hook. Everything ready to go. Let's have a little ship out and see what happens. Every single time I ship out when I'm pellet fishing, I like to feed a little bit of bait. One of the biggest mistakes I think people make is they get a little bit complacent with the fact that then they've go, oh, well, I just fed before I caught that fish. You're on a commercial. There's loads of fish, particularly when it's warm. They're active, they're looking for bait all the time. Even if you're just going to feed 10 micros, I like to feed something every single chuck in. I think little and often is the most important thing. So because I've just fed a full cad pot, I'm just going to put like a third of a cad pot in for this first chuck, and we'll take it from there. We'll see how we get on, see how many bites we're getting, and take it from there. You notice when I filled the pot up, I just held the bulk in my hand here. I brought the pot back, put the pellets in, gave them a little gentle tap with my thumb so they come out, and that just stops my hook pellet hooking up on anything, and then I can swing it out into the lake and ship out. So let's see if we can battle this wind, and let's see if we can get a few bites, and I'll talk you through the presentation. It's getting very windy now, so I'll talk you through the presentation. This would be a classic day when I could have fished a lot shorter, you know, had there not been the bankside disturbance. So I'm just going to feed those pellets in there like that, and I'm going to pick my rig out. And what I like to do is make sure the pellet is slightly downwind and almost put it in so everything's sort of arcing back in towards me. So the pellet's coming back in towards me, and it's sort of going to hit the bottom with the line all nice and tight. For me, that's very, very important, because I've tried a lot of lowering it in when I'm pellet fishing, and I think that's all okay when I'm up against an island or something like that. But I've got to be honest, I love giving it that little bit of fall through the water. It's almost like the fish chase it. There we go, we've had a bite. What we got here? That was quick. Nice skimmer, I think. I think there's millions of skimmers in this lake, so I am expecting some skimmers today. There we go. Classic of a classic sort of start to a pellet session. I think there's probably one of these in nearly every fishery I've ever been on, like a 6-ounce skimmer. This is almost like the first fish on the bait. Often you'll get quite a few of these before maybe some other fish start to push in. But that's what I'm talking about, there being so many mouths down there. There must be so many fish in this venue keen to eat the pellets. I'm going to say that most of those pellets that I've fed have probably been eaten already if my pellet got eaten or I had a bite as quick as that. So this time I'm actually going to just half fill the pot. You've got to remember, if there's 6-ounce skimmers eating all your pellets, there's no way you're going to attract a carp or an F1 or a tench or whatever else into your peg, because there just won't be enough bait for them. You know, if you want to make sure that there's enough bait for those other fish, you've got to judge the amount of pellets you're using to obviously the response you're getting. So that bite was really quick. Just gonna lay the rig back in again now. Same sort of thing. I'm trying to keep it nice and tight over the top of where I'm fishing. Just let the pellet fall back in. And often, just as it settles is when you get your bite, almost like the fish have just followed it down. There you go. I think we're going to be in for a good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is obviously looking like a lot of fish there. You can see why it's such a bread and butter method. It's just a method that attracts everything straight away. You've watched me put the first feed in, put the rig in, and these, however many of these must there be, so many. So, you know, I'm gonna get straight into the rhythm of the fishing now, because obviously there's lots of bites. I've got these skimmer slime. I often get asked this. I always take the time just to take this off the line. The best way to do it is just to get my finger and thumb, push it up to the hook length knot, where you've got like a hook length, so you've got a nice little thicker bit of line, and then just flick it all off together. Make sure you get it off the line, because one, it can affect the way your float sits, but two, it's obviously a very visual thing in the water for the fish, so make sure you've cleared it off. But you can see how quickly we're getting the bites. We can even potentially, there's lots of things we can potentially do to catch bigger fish, but to start with, we're just going to keep the feed going in nice and regularly and try and attract some other fish. But you can, one of the good things that you can try is actually putting on an even thicker hook and line. So rather than using like an SFL, I might get like a 14 GPM to 016. You know, there's loads of fish feeding. I don't need to go dead light with hook and line. And sometimes when you go a bit stronger, you actually put those little skimmers off. So you don't get as many bites from little skimmers, but when you do get a bite, that's a tiny one. But when you do get a bite, it might be a bigger fish. So that might be a nice thing to do today to effectively, what we got here, roach. So that might be a good thing to do today. Like this, the bites are so quick, there's so many fish to go at, that it might be a good idea to put like a heavier, thicker hook and line on and almost try and put them off. You know, those sort of things can help as well with a 6mm pellet. But just for now, I'm definitely just going to keep going, because obviously the main goal of today is to show you guys the fishing. I mean, that was so quick, taking on the drop. This is what I mean. Look how often I'm feeding. Just in this short little clip, I think this is like the 4th time I've fed. I just see people way too almost patient, just sitting there thinking that the fish are going to come. You've got to be nice and proactive and get the bait into them all the time. So let's just swing that out there. Lovely fishing. What a fantastic lake this is. Just a bit windy today. Very gusty. You know, I could never fish with a short length of line today. I'd have to use that heavier one. Oh. Just try and hang on to it. Get it down and let it settle. If it gets really bad, I might even move that last back shot up a little bit, just to give myself a little bit more relief. Also, it looks like my float's sitting down a little bit. I might just take one of my droppers off. It's really getting bad now. This is definitely the sort of day when, you know, you could fish a lot closer. You could fish like 5, 6 sections of pole. Don't make it too difficult for yourself. What have we got here then? Something slightly bigger. What brilliant fishing. Unbelievable fishing. This is why pellets are so good. This is their bait. This is their, oh dear, this is their bread and butter bait. Maybe just foul hooked one there perhaps. Just going to take one of my little shot off on my rig. Tell you what else I'm going to do. I'm going to put a slightly bigger hook on with thicker line, because immediately when I started fishing there, I thought to myself, you know what, there's a lot of fish here today, and sometimes just putting a bigger hook on and having thicker line, it just keeps those little fish away. And obviously whatever that was a slightly better fish, so we want to make sure we've got it. So I'm putting a 14 GPM on now, which is a slightly bigger hook actually, and slightly thicker wire. Same sort of shape as that SFL. You know, it's so quick to change a hook length, it's worth doing. Should we even put a 6mm on? What do you reckon? Let's go for it, I reckon. See what happens. So you can see the difference now. If I put that on there, you can see it's like a big hook on the 6mm. Everything's about right in my eyes. I'm also just going to move my last shot slightly further up the line because it's a bit gusty and I'm finding it difficult to hold it still. These are all the little things that when you're fishing, you need to do to keep on top of what you're doing. So let's feed again, half a pot of pellets. Almost like excited to ship out, I can't wait. Just giving those, the fact the pellets are soft means they hold in the pot brilliantly, by the way. So like literally all I've got to do is just turn it over and flick it over. Wind's very bad. And then just literally, just off the back edge I am, of the main bait. God, the bites, they bite so quickly. There must be so many fish. There we go, I can hold that, that's nice now. It's holding that nice and steady. I'm going to try and wait for a proper bite because I've got that bigger hook and line on. So hopefully something, probably be a roach, no my luck, that grabs it. Let's see. You notice that my float is really shotted down. You're probably looking at it going, wow, I can hardly see it, Lee. But there we go, another bite straight away, crazy. See what I'm going to do, I'm getting bites very quickly. I'm just going to push it a little bit further past the bait because I think there's a bit of chaos going there around all those micros. So now look, here's the joint in my hand, but actually I'm fishing about a foot past my bait now, just because there seemed like there was loads of little bites. So that might just, there we go, that was a lot nicer. Oh, he says as it come off. That was a lot nicer though, it wasn't like bouncing around all the time. There's clearly a lot of fish in there today. Let's just check my hook bait. Looks all right. Stick a 4mm back on with this great big hook. Hopefully it just keeps those little fish at bay. But I'm going to feed again the same. And that's something I do quite a bit, you know, like if you're getting lots of bites like that, lots of like, you know, there's a lot of individual bits of bait in my peg now from all these pellets. So if I try to lay the pellet in amongst all those pellets, and I reckon there'll be like 30 fish all fighting over each other down there for the bait. Imagine that underwater scene, fish just darting around everywhere. If you just push it, say 30 centimetres past where you've cupped the pellets in, there'll still be loads of fish there because there's loads of fish in your peg. So what happens is you get a cleaner bite like that and you get the fish straight away, and that can really help you, because if you imagine all these little skimmers sat over the top of those pellets, they must be like all heads down trying to get at it. It'd be like, you know, Zolt at a buffet. You know, he's there trying to get at all the food. And if you just put yours at the end, somebody's going to pick it off there without fighting. And that's a great way of fishing as well. Sometimes when it goes a little bit quieter, I like to drop back onto the pellets, because if you drop back onto the pellets, that's often where a big carp has come in, pushed all those little skimmers out. So you've got to read the peg all the time, but it's great fishing, absolutely great. I'm going to try a 6mm again. I'm going to try a 6mm for you one more time. Looks to me like at the moment there's a lot of little skimmers in the peg, and probably for the next, like, I don't know, hour or so, it's going to need to settle down. Those little skimmers are going to come in and keep clearing out all the bait. But all that activity in the peg is what draws the bigger fish in the first place. So the activity from all these little skimmers is soon going to get the attention of a nearby carp or bream, and they will eventually push these little fish out, which shows why it's an all-round method, because while your mate's sitting there on a hard pellet or bomb and corn or an 8mm pellet waiting for one fish, you get to catch all these fish, but also you're doing something even more attractive, which means the chances are the carp will come to you first anyway. So that's why it's such a great way of fishing. Oh, missed a bite. Missed a bite. Notice how I'm not striking as well, like I'm not giving it the big strike. Effectively, when the float goes under when you're pellet fishing, all I'm looking to do is just gently lift the pole up, probably like a foot. You don't want to like lift it too, there we go. Oh, that wind is a nightmare. But just literally lift it up a foot, set the hook. Often those skimmers, they eat the pellet and then come up in the water, so you need to lift it at least a foot. But when you don't get a bite, you can drop back down. Lovely skimmer. You can just drop back down again and then you're fishing straight away, and you don't want to strike your pellet off. So this is a classic pellety type day. I'm going to sit here and continue to catch a few.